The Rinkside Roundup is up on today's episode. We'll talk about Beckett Sennecke, Shane Wright, and a lot more top performers this week on this episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the Rinkside Roundup, where we highlight the week's top performers. It's an article we put out every week at Elite Prospects. So on today's episode, the first segment will be about Beckett Sennecke, who finally gets the call up to the World Juniors and had a great week overall, including a beauty of a goal. We'll talk about that in detail in the first segment. In the second segment, we'll talk about Shane Wright and Owen Beck, two two-way centers who've been playing well in different leagues. And then in the final segment, we'll look at Luca Del Bel Belluz and Malcolm Spence, who've been having great weeks as well. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. As usual, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with Beckett Sennecke, who finally gets the call up to the World Juniors. After it took an injury, but he got there. In the meantime, though, in the last couple of weeks since the announcement of the roster of the World Juniors training camp for Team Canada, Sennecke has been doing absolutely everything to prove Canada wrong in not selecting him the first time around. So, yeah, talk me through in detail what you liked about Beckett Sennecke this past week.
Creating everything on the ice. I mean, he had like an insane stretch of play where in a 3-game span, he scored 14 points. That stretched back to last week, and they won't happen often this season, but this player was featured in back-to-back Rinkside Roundups for us, where you talked about him last week and I talked about him this week. But the big piece of news, as you mentioned, has been that he is on that World Junior camp invitation roster. They're still gonna narrow it down. It's not like some of the other rosters of other teams that have already been announced that are basically finalized. With Canada, there's going to be another refinement process to cut it down somewhat more. So there's no guarantee that Sennecke is going to crack that lineup at the end of the day, but he's at least in the running now. But this past week, he scored 2 goals and 8 points in 3 games for the Oshawa Generals, including potentially the goal of the season in the OHL, where he absolutely dangled the pants off of Sam Dickinson with 2 consecutive skate-to-stick moves to cut inside, and he shelved the puck top shelf. And he did that while completely off balance as well. Just an incredible solo effort where he attacked the offensive zone all on his own, and it didn't matter. He was unstoppable, and to dissect London of all teams like that was a very, very impressive display of rush skill for Beckett Sennecke. But he's just been continuing to progress what he has been doing already so well, going back to last season. That combination of elite level handling skill, high-end creativity, as well as some real grit and physical style too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you look back at that year, where he started off the year very clunky, very uncoordinated, really not knowing what to do with his newfound size, because keep in mind, Beckett Sennecke grew a ton in a very short span, came into the OHL at about 5'10", 5'11". Right now is about 6'2", 6'3", even maybe pushing 6'4". So that growth in such a short span of time usually lends itself to a bit more lack of coordination. Especially as players kind of figure out the new distance between their eyes and their stick, their eyes and their skates. It's a difficult adaptation to kind of figure out on the fly. But so far, since the second half of last season, Beckett Sennecke has just been on an upwards trajectory that's been absolutely ridiculous to watch. Very much more coordinated, using his hands a lot more efficiently, while still showing high-end creativity, the willingness and desire to explore plays to kind of figure out on the fly what works and what doesn't. And we've seen that so far this year, but I think my favorite progression in Sennecke's game has really kind of occurred over the last kind of month or two. And it's been his willingness to shoot a lot more. He's kind of lended himself into a shooting role with the Oshawa Generals, kind of become their offensive focal point in terms of their, being their trigger man on the power play, being the guy who drives a lot of transition offense, takes some shots off the rush. Would you agree?
I would, but one of the things that makes Sennecke so dangerous that he is such a high-end playmaker as well. And what I've loved, like of course he's been shooting a lot more, but he's been using that shooting threat to open up playmaking options, and he's been just dominating in that facet of like deceiving defenses, making them bite on the shot, and making those cross seam passes. So he's been certainly making the most of the opportunities that have been opening up to him in those offensive sequences when he is oftentimes the trigger man now in Oshawa, as you mentioned. But one thing I kind of also wanted to ask you about with his game is, have you also noticed him being even more middle driven than he was last season this year? Because I certainly have. He's just constantly cutting to the middle of the ice, and he's doing it in so many different ways. He's doing it with power moves. He's doing it off puck. He's doing it on puck. He's doing it with like high-end skill, like we saw in that one goal against London, where he got to the middle of the ice through elite level handling. He's constantly getting to dangerous areas now, isn't he?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it has a lot to do with his physical expansion as well. Like he's added a lot more mechanical improvements in terms of the way that he gets to the inside. On puck, it's all about shielding, protecting, and using quick crossover moves to get into the middle of the ice. Off the puck, it has a lot to do with the way that he engages opponents, the way that he kind of ties up their hands, ties up their sticks, it kind of forces their skates into going one way before kind of exploding the other. So there's a lot of really high-end details in terms of his off-puck game, his physical game, that have really come a long way. So overall, just really, really impressed with the improvements in Sennecke's game in that sense. Let's go back to that draft in 2024. Earlier this year in June, July, there were starting to be some talks about Sennecke potentially being a top 10 pick. And then on draft day, on the floor, we started getting some rumblings and rumors that Anaheim was targeting him with their third overall pick. And I mean, we saw his reaction. I think above all people, I think Sennecke was the one who was the most surprised by being selected by the Anaheim Ducks at third overall. But when you think about the fit with Anaheim, what they needed to add, this makes a ton of sense, right?
Totally. I mean, what Anaheim needed was a high-skill, power forward, right shot winger. That is exactly what Becket Sennecke is. He is the profile that team was missing down the right-hand side. He brings that dynamic element where some of the other players high up in the lineup for the Anaheim Ducks are very like intense, physical, smart, quite skilled, hard shooting players like Mason McTavish, but they don't have that handling ability and raw pace to just dissect defenses and break games open in just a single shift. Becket Sennecke brings that, and especially now with Trevor Zegras struggling a lot more, there was a real need to bring in some more dynamism, some more skill to ramp up the play in the offensive zone and to just dominate with long puck touches. And that's something that Becket Sennecke does to a really high degree. And It was a really gutsy swing for Anaheim to take, but it's a very interesting one. And I mean, to start the season, Becket Sennecke has 44 points and 21 goals in the OHL in just under 30 games. So he's been lighting it up. He's been fantastic. He's picked up where he's left off and then some from last season. So certainly a player that deserves some merit from us here, and a player that I always really enjoy checking in on and watching, because there are a few more entertaining players in the OHL, aren't there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're talking about a player who just understands the game at a higher and higher level every time you go and watch him. So it's absolutely phenomenal to watch. And again, the creativity, the smarts are there. There's a lot to work with there with Beckett Sennecke. And I think overall, if you look back at that draft class, again, never, ever doubt the Anaheim Ducks when it comes to high picks. They know what they're doing. No one expected Mason McTavish to go in the top three. He went in the top three. He's turned into a phenomenal prospect for the Ducks so far. So never count them out of these high-end decisions. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into our second segment here where we talk a bit more about some two-way centers, Shane Wright and Owen Beck. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors over at PrizePicks.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to adore Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can win up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. No need to win, that $50 is guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. This week on PrizePicks, I'll be eyeing the hockey board, looking at Jack Hughes for more than 4 shots on goal and Artemi Panarin for more than 1 assist. It's so simple to make my picks and have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. Prize Picks, run your game.
Alrighty, so moving on to a second segment here, we have Shane Wright and Owen Beck to talk about. But while we're on the subject of Oshawa Generals, we just talked about Becket Sennecke here in the first segment. Luca Morelli just signed his entry-level contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets. So very interesting progression from him. Very, very strong producer this season as a defender for the Generals, and well, more than deserved. I think this is more about controlling the possibility of an NCAA move rather than having Morelli be an NHLer anytime soon. The ELC just makes sure that Morelli will stay in the OHL and then graduate to the AHL and NHL later on. It's a great way for the Blue Jackets to control his progression path. But moving on to Shane Wright and Owen Beck. Let's start with Wright, who's been playing the NHL so far for the Seattle Kraken and has been kind of heating up over the past couple of weeks. And heading into this week, had a great span of games here. Talk me through his kind of production this past week and how well he's been doing for the Kraken.
He's been doing excellently. He had 3 goals and 4 points last week in 4 games, playing third line minutes as the third line center, playing between Oliver Bjorkstrand and Eli Tolvanen, and they're really gaining chemistry as a line. That trio has been playing some really good hockey, and Shane Wright has taken some really important steps in his development from what I've seen in recent games. He's added so much pace and urgency to his play. This is a player who in his draft year would always sit back, wait for play to develop, and then be opportunistic with when he would try to make that incisive play, get possession, and create something with it. That is no longer the player that Shane Wright is, and that he's a lot more of an NHL player as he's currently constituted, as he's constantly moving his feet. He's never stops working. He's become a really intense forechecker, constantly applying pressure, even with the puck on his stick. Really high pace, constantly moving, keeps going in rotations in the offensive zone, has become a really solid net front presence as well for the Seattle Kraken, just bullying players are at the net front. He's such a sturdily built player. He's very difficult to knock off of his feet, and he just positions himself in that right in front of the crease, and he's been doing some really good work there. He's constantly switching positions with his line mates as well, finding pockets of space, and the goals he's scored have all been very opportunistic, very Shane Wright-esque goals that aren't the flashiest, but are just created by him being at the right place at the right time. But he's taken some really important steps in his development, which I'm very glad to see. I've always appreciated this player, but the development has been slowing down a little bit in recent years. But that has not been the case early this season, where he had a bit of a slow start offensively, but he's really picked up his form. But Hattie, I want to ask you, how do you think that Shane Wright can make the biggest difference to Seattle's lineup as he's currently built in like this season? How can he get involved?
Well, to continue to expand on his pace, right? Like, when you have a player as intelligent as Wright is, he's able to keep up that mental awareness, that mental processing at higher paces. He just needs to unlock and access that higher pace on a more consistent basis. So for me, that's going to be kind of the main development objective for him, is to make sure that he keeps his pace high throughout his games, because the NHL is all about high pace. You can't play that slow cerebral game. Very, very few NHLers play a slow cerebral game consistently and constantly. Even the ones who do, they do that when the time is right, on the power play, in kind of 4-on-4 situations, when they have the time to slow down the play, react, kind of build things incrementally. I'm thinking of guys like Nick Suzuki, and those kind of brands of players. Tyler Toffoli's in that bunch as well. When it comes to accessing that higher pace of play, it's all about that at the NHL level, and I think that Shane Wright will be able to, with time, and has even started, as you mentioned, this week to kind of show a bit more of that ability to go and reach those high place plays. So I'm very excited to see what happens with Shane Wright moving forward. But let's talk about Owen Beck. I don't think pace is ever at all an issue with Owen Beck.
God, no.
None, not at all. He's up to 20 points this season in the AHL. His progression to the AHL has been incredibly smooth and predictably smooth as well, because he's an incredibly detailed, incredibly smart, and incredibly pacey player, right?
He really is, and he's coming into his own with the Laval Rocket. He now leads the team in points, and this is a team that has some AHL stars like Alex Barré-Boulet. I mean, even Joshua Roy has been playing a lot in the AHL this year, and yet neither has scored more points this season than Owen Beck to this point. Not by much, but still very impressive for an AHL rookie. He's, as you mentioned, he plays with high pace. He gained Pascal Vincent, the coach. He gained his trust with just his high effort level defensively, constantly being in the right place at the right time, winning key face-off draws, and just being consistently intelligent. He's so aware of the ice on both sides of the puck, and he always knows where he has to be to make the biggest difference for his team. And that has gained him minutes and trust at the AHL level. And with those minutes, he's really started to explore his offensive game. His in-motion wrist shot, I think, is probably his best individual offensive tool at this point, if we're not including the skating, because the pure speed is how he creates most of his chances. But the in-motion wrist shot has solved quite a few AHL goaltenders this season, both from range and from in tight. Beck's been able to generate a lot of power from his wrist shot, and he conceals it really well. He gets pucks through traffic. He attacks defenders' triangles. He makes sure that the shots he gets off are screened in some capacity. He's not a player that just whacks the puck on goal when he has no other ideas. He's very proactive in his shot selection. But he's a player that I think could probably be an NHLer as soon as next season. Would you agree with that, or do you think that giving him another year on top of that in the AHL would be ideal for his development?
No, I think he's good. I think he's ready for the next step. I think, in terms of what he brings to the game, slots in perfectly in Montreal's bottom six. And this all depends on what happens with Jake Evans, though, because Jake Evans is that guy for the Habs, the guy who plays the minutes that Owen Beck would benefit the most from. Third line center, top power play, top face-off taker in the defensive, top power play, I said top penalty kill rather. Top face-off taker in the defensive zone, all the defensive responsibilities. Owen Beck would benefit a ton from those minutes with Montreal. But I also think that if you give him a bit more time, allow Jake Evans to continue to be that guy for Montreal for the time being, because I think in terms of team morale, in terms of what he brings to the game, Jake Evans, if you let him go in free agency next year, you're losing a big piece of Montreal's identity as a top penalty killing team, a defensively responsible team. We're talking about a young roster who needs that type of guy in order to stay afloat in those situations. But I think if you can have Owen Beck as a winger next year next to Jake Evans, have them split face-off responsibilities and kind of figure it out from there, I think that's a great spot for Owen Beck to be, and a great player for him to learn from. Jake Evans is an incredible professional, a student of the game, and a player who has really kind of started taking leadership qualities in Montreal, has become a leader in the dressing room and outside of it. So I think that's a great spot for him. Would you agree?
I totally would. I think that molding a game after Jake Evans is something that multiple prospects in Montreal system should probably aim to do. Like many of those bottom six projected centers that are good defensively, and there's quite a few of those in Montreal system. I mean, Oliver Kapanen also comes to mind. I think a lot of them would benefit from learning a thing or two from Jake Evans, and there's no better way to learn from somebody than playing on a line with them. So I think that would be a lot of fun, and also just get Owen Beck used to the NHL pace from the wing rather than from the center, which is where he will play the bulk of his NHL career. Yeah. But just to ease that transition, and also allow him to flourish with his speed and really be able to push the pace from the wing in that capacity. But I think that wraps up this second segment for us. In the next one, we'll be wrapping up the show by talking about Luca Del Bel Belluz, who's also been lighting up the AHL this season for the Cleveland Monsters, as well as Malcolm Spence, who may not be the flashiest player in the OHL this season. He's certainly not as flashy as his teammate Matthew Schaefer is, but he's definitely a prospect that deserves note and who had a really good week this past week. But first, a quick message from our sponsors over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need all in one place to place live bets on the NFL. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take those swings on American football with the NFL or European football with the Champions League, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you're not a football fan in any capacity and prefer tennis or golf. Or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, so let's close things off here in our final segment with talk about Luca Del Bel Belluz and Malcolm Spence, who have been playing really well so far this week as well. Let's start with Del Bel Belluz, who's been absolutely lighting up the AHL. I think he's tops in the AHL in points. Is that right?
He's second. He's second in points in the AHL. In just his second professional season, he's really exploded this year for Cleveland.
Absolutely, yeah. He's always been kind of a less mechanically strong skater, but who makes up for that with really good reads, offensive skill, a great shot, and really high-end intelligence and processing in the offensive zone. And that's kind of been clear so far in the AHL as well, right? Like, he's still been compensating for his lack of pace, his lack of foot speed with high-end reads.
High-end reads and just being a lot more positionally sound than he was in his draft year. In his draft year, this was an OHL player who liked to hang back in like the high slot area, get the puck, dangle around a player, and then shoot from the mid slot. He was very he's playing his minutes in that middle lane, but staying a bit further away from the net. He's adjusted his game by becoming a really, really effective net front presence, and that has allowed his game to flourish. That's where his anticipation it can do the most damage offensively. It's where his skating does not hamper him nearly as much. His puck touches are not the longest, but he makes the most of them. When he gets the puck, he whacks at rebounds. He's a really good screen at the net front, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world at like 6'1", 185. He's really, really solid, and he bullies players that are 30 pounds heavier than him at the net front at the AHL level, and has been just very opportunistic with his goal scoring. It hasn't been pretty all the time, but it's been very effective, and he's really making the most of his high-end shooting mechanics, as well as his high-end processing and ability to create offense from like claustrophobic situations right down low under heavy pressure. He doesn't need space and time to fire a shot off or get his stick onto an errant puck. So he's been adapting really nicely, and as you mentioned, the skating ability is still really subpar. It's like a 3.5, 4 grade. If we're going by EP's grading scale, still, it's not a strength whatsoever. That said, he has really, really learned how to build a cohesive, full game around that deficiency that is still clearly very effective against pro competition.
Absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to watch kind of progress so far in the next couple of weeks. But let's finally close things off here with Malcolm Spence from the Erie Otters, who's been on a tear as well so far this past week. Scored 4 goals and 5 points this past week, bringing a season total to 15 goals, 19 assists, and 34 points. He's eligible for the 2025 NHL draft, and his game kind of falls a bit in the shadow of Matthew Schaefer's over in Erie, but he's still got a phenomenally detailed and pro-ready game, doesn't he?
He really does. He does so many things so well. He's physically refined. He's already very physically developed, and he uses that to just bully OHL defenses. He's really middle driven. He's constantly finding pockets of space in the middle lane. He's a player that scores so many of his points by just being at the right place at the right time. Quite a few of the sequences that I was watching in preparation for the article was just like, oh, he's in wide open space. Let's go back. Let's see why he's in wide open space. And it's just really strong reads, playing in defenders' blind spots, playing really effectively between checks, and just making life very annoying for defenses in very subtle ways. He's not flashy whatsoever, but he's so effective. And he's a player that I think all of us at EP, whenever we watch him, we really appreciate. And even though he did fall down our draft board by, I believe, 10 slots from 6th overall to 16th, he's a player that we really, really see as a potential second line piece in a complementary role, but very effective in executing that. But as you mentioned, you can fall a little bit into the shadow of Matthew Schaefer, even on that goal he scored this week. No one's talking about the finish, the backdoor finish for Malcolm Spence on it, even though he did very well to get into that position. But you can't look away from the dangles of Matthew Schaefer, but still a player that I think we probably haven't talked about enough so far this season, and one that I want to highlight for his strong play this week.
Absolutely. It's all about pace and energy with this game, right? Like, he's just constantly driving at opposing defenses. And like you said, like, he plays in blind spots of defenders so incredibly well. He gets lost in coverage so incredibly easily. So you watch this game and you think, sometimes, watching his game in terms of the details, in terms of the processing, you think, well, I could just pick him up, dropping him in the NHL, and be just as effective. But it takes a bit more pace and energy as well to be an effective NHLer. I think that inevitably will come with time. I think Malcolm Spence is as close to a guaranteed NHLer as you can get, just a matter of how high in the lineup he can play. And I think that really has to do with the improvements in his playmaking, his shot, his handling skill kind of improving as well. Those will be key aspects because the physical tools are there, right? Like, he's got the speed, the skating stride's phenomenal. The physical aspects are there. He's already refined and developed as a physical body, right? It's just a matter of kind of uplifting those finesse skills, those finesse tools to reach the level of his reads. Then you've got a second liner for sure. Any last words to add on Malcolm Spence before we close things off here on this episode?
Subtle excellence is the name of the game with Malcolm Spence. He's not going to pop off on highlight reels. He's not going to get fans out of their seats, but he's going to play consistent minutes and really gain a coach's trust, and just be a player that the entire team can rely on night in, night out.
Absolutely. So that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review, and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports on YouTube's first 24/7 sports news channel. And make sure to tune in for our next episodes as we finish off our prospects coverage for the month of December. This has been Hattie Kalikesh with Sebastian High. Happy holidays, and we hope you tune in next time.